My name's Liam. I'm 29 years old. I was married for 7 years and have a daughter who's about 4.5 now. Let me tell you a little about myself. I'm tall on the leaner side, but overall, I think I look decent. No complaints when it comes to my sense of style. Growing up, I was always into sports, spent 10 years swimming, tried a bit of martial arts here and there, and even graduated from music school with a focus on guitar. Becoming an officer was always my dream. I've got this natural sense of justice, which led to people calling me a nice guy. That label made things awkward when it came to talking to girls, and not just them, honestly. But I worked hard to overcome that. These days, I'd say I've shed that reputation, though it wasn't without a few hard knocks from life teaching me lessons along the way. Now, about my ex-wife, Paula. We were classmates back in high school for a few years. She had this striking presence, stood out with her looks and talents. She could dance, sing like an angel, and was fluent in Spanish, like she'd grown up speaking it. At school, she was the girl everyone either wanted to be or envied, depending on who you asked. And the guys? They were all after her. She had a string of admirers, but eventually, she settled on dating the most popular guy around, a charming guy into parkour. They made quite the couple. As for me, I wasn't interested in Paula back then. I kept my distance from the crowd chasing after her. Honestly, I figured there was no point trying to compete, and I didn't want to anyway. I was in my own relationship at the time. Paula's parents had a complicated history. Her mom was pregnant with Paula when she began secretly seeing her future stepdad. They were sneaking around, dating, kissing, all while still married to their respective spouses. Eventually, both left their partners and got together when Paula was just a toddler. After the divorce, Paula's mom would occasionally bring her ex-husband food out of pity. Paula once told me her biological dad was a good man, though soft and unassertive, even comparing him to me. I didn't take kindly to that. I told her straight up that if we ever split, and she showed up with food for me, I'd toss it right in front of her. Funny thing is, when we did part ways, no food ever came. In 10th grade, Paula and her family moved to a different city. Years later, in 2015, we started chatting online. She came back to visit for a couple of weeks, and one evening we met up. She hopped into my car, and the moment I saw her, it hit me, love at first sight. I can't explain why, but I fell for her, hard. Looking back now, I realize I'd built the whole thing up in my head. It was like one of those situations where you're eager to be fooled, and you happily go along with it. When Paula came to visit, we spent time together in a group, meeting up at cafes with mutual friends, taking walks, catching movies, and even hitting a club. I didn't try to seduce her, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. For me, it was just innocent conversations while secretly trying to keep my feelings for her under wraps. A few weeks later, she flew back home. Coincidentally, a couple of months after that, I ended up in the same city while on a trip with a friend. To give you some background, I didn't come from a wealthy family, so flying across the country to hang out wasn't something I could do on a whim. Back then, I didn't have my own place, my own car, or much to my name. I was just a regular college student. Most of my money came from my parents, with a little extra from part-time jobs. When we met up again, Paula, my friend, and I hung out at an apartment owned by a mutual acquaintance. One night, as we watched a movie before bed, I found myself lying next to her. I gathered the courage to put an arm around her and plant a few kisses on her shoulder. She didn't pull away, which felt like a green light. Still, since we were all sharing the same small apartment, there wasn't much room for anything more. For 2 nights straight, we just lay there, kissing and holding each other. At the time, I didn't have anyone else in my life romantically, and my track record with relationships was sparse, just 2 short-lived ones. Hugs and kisses were about as far as I'd gone. Paula, on the other hand, had a far more colorful past, with several relationships already under her belt. Compared to her, I felt like an innocent dandelion, naive and inexperienced. As the Spanish playwright Lope de Vega once said, "Love cannot exist between those who are unequal." I'd started reading more around that time, so forgive me if I sound a bit pretentious. When it came time to leave, Paula surprised me by inviting me and a few others to visit her city for the weekend. Her parents were out of town in Turkey. I was the only one who took her up on the offer. I scraped together enough for a plane ticket, and when I arrived, she met me at the airport. Her city blew me away: lush greenery, stunning architecture, and this European charm that felt worlds apart from where I came from. And there was Paula, just the two of us. That first night, nerves, or maybe just inexperience, got the best of me. Still, by some miracle, I finally lost my virginity. I was 18 and had always been adamant about waiting for someone who truly moved me. Paula was that person. Over the next couple of days, I felt a shift in myself. By the time I flew back home, I was no longer a boy, but not quite a man either, just someone stepping into a new chapter. We kept in touch after that, mostly through phone calls and texts. I was the first to say, "I love you," and she replied, though it felt more like politeness than passion. We tried a long-distance relationship. Spring turned into summer, and I focused on finishing my diploma and graduating from college. I was 19, having finished school early and completed a technical degree. By fall, I'd promised Paula I'd move to her city. While she spent the summer in England, I worked and saved every penny for the move. Our conversations during that time were full of sweetness and promises. She sent photos from England, often with the same Spanish guy in the frame. I didn't think much of it at the time, but later, it would come back to me. When fall came, I kept my promise and flew to her city. The moment I saw her, though, things fell off. She was distant and cold, nothing like the affectionate girl I remembered from spring. At the apartment I'd rented, she cooked dinner but kept her distance, physically and emotionally. Then she dropped a bomb. "I don't think you're the one for me," she said. "I'm not sure about us." That night, despite the awkwardness, she stayed. She asked me if I'd try to win her over. We slept together, but I lay awake, my mind racing with confusion and hurt. The next day, she left without a kiss. Over a few more strained meetings, I met her mom, but soon, Paula told me she'd decided to end things. She said her mom had advised her to let me go, telling her there was no future for us, no job, no housing, no love. It wasn't serious. She urged me to fly home. Heartbroken doesn't begin to describe how I felt. I was 19, broke, jobless, and lost. A couple of weeks later, I enlisted in the army, where I met someone who became one of my closest friends. That decision marked a turning point in my life. The heartbreak took its toll. I lost weight, felt sick with stress, and struggled with my emotions. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep looking back or obsessing over her. I had to move forward. In the army, my background in sports helped me land a spot in an elite unit. I pushed myself to the limit, transforming physically and mentally. I even picked up my guitar again, eventually playing at bars and events, not for money, but for the sheer joy of it. After enlisting, I eventually joined the police force, where my role focused on investigating various types of crimes. Getting in was no small feat. The competition was fierce, but I managed to make it. In fact, I became the youngest officer in the department's history. The job came with a good salary, prestige, promising prospects, and most importantly, I genuinely enjoyed the work. Everything seemed to fall into place. I took pride in working honestly, keeping a promise I'd made to my grandmother before starting. No matter what challenges came my way, I'd remain true to myself and my values. That period of my life was a high point. My friends and I spent late nights at bars, took trips to the ocean, and explored volcanic landscapes. I started meeting women and, though nothing serious came out of it, I more than made up for my earlier years of inexperience. There were plenty of flings and sleepless nights, which helped me become more confident and outgoing. For the first time, I even started saving a little money. After a year in the job, in December, just before New Year's, I decided to visit Paula's city again. I should mention that Paula had been out of my life for about 2 years. I ignored her during that time, except for 2 moments of weakness. The first was during my army days. On her birthday, I sent her flowers with a note that read, "If you smile, I'll marry you. If you smile again, I'll definitely marry you." She didn't respond, but years later, I learned she'd cried when she read it, even though she was in a relationship at the time. It wasn't because she missed me, of course, just a sentimental reaction, I suppose. The second time was when I finished my service. On the way home, fresh out of the gates, I sent her a message saying something like, "I've just completed an important chapter in my life, and I really wish I could share it with you." Fast forward to my trip, 2 years after we broke up. It was my first vacation, and I flew into her city. I bought some expensive pastries and headed straight to her house. Why? Back then I told my friends I was visiting because it was a great city and I was thinking of moving there. But if I'm honest, I went for her. Looking back now, I realize I'd been working so hard during those 2 years, transforming myself, achieving goals, not for myself, but for her. Somewhere deep down, I wanted revenge, to prove to her that she'd made a mistake letting me go. But as it turned out, the fool in this story wasn't her. It was me. When I got to her house and knocked on the door, her mom answered with a smile and invited me in. Paula was in the bathroom, so I waited in the living room. Every second felt like an hour as I sat there, heart pounding in my chest. Finally, she walked out. She looked stunning, thinner, with a fresh haircut that suited her perfectly. I kissed her on the cheek, and we sat down for tea. The evening went smoothly. I cracked jokes, shared stories about my work, and even hinted at plans to buy property in the city. She seemed engaged, and there were casual touches, her hand on my arm or shoulder, even with her mom right there in the room. After about an hour and a half, I got up to leave, saying I had to go. It's all about creating that air of mystery, right? Paula didn't seem ready for the night to end, and we agreed to meet again. Now, I don't remember exactly whether she was in a relationship at the time, but her Facebook profile showed she was in a relationship and linked to a guy. Strangely enough, when I later suggested we meet up again, she pushed back. Her response was something like, "We're not in a relationship, so I don't see why you're insisting on this." It wasn't word for word, but that was the gist. In the end, Paula agreed to meet me for dinner, though she brought a friend along. At the restaurant, they joked about me footing the bill, saying something like, "Liam's paycheck will handle it." It didn't come off as greedy, more like playful teasing. I wasn't bothered, and I think we even split the check. Afterward, we headed to the apartment where I was staying during my vacation, a friend's place. There was wine, music, and me doing my best to entertain both of them. Later, on the balcony with Paula, things took a turn. She'd had a lot to drink, and at one point, she gave me a compliment, squinted her eyes, pouted her lips, and leaned in for a quick kiss. It was clear she wanted more. I called a cab for her friend, walked her to the subway, and got her number, just in case, and yeah, I'm pretty sure she was into me that night. Then I went back to Paula's room. She was lying on the bed and asked if I wanted her. I didn't waste time answering. Clothes came off, and things heated up fast. But mid-moment, she suddenly said she wasn't feeling great and asked me to order her a cab home. We got dressed, waited for the car while still kissing, and I saw her off. We spent some more time together during my trip. One time, we went to the movies with her friend. Paula and her friends sat together, and she kept her distance from me. I didn't push it, though. I just enjoyed being in her company. Looking back, I wonder if that distance was because she was still in a relationship. If so, I guess that means she cheated on her boyfriend with me. For what it's worth, I heard the guy eventually moved to the Czech Republic, then Belarus, and joined some kind of sect. They'd go out to the woods, sing in choirs, and do round dances. He even took Paula with him at one point. They stopped talking after he left, so who knows if they were still together when I came to visit. After I flew back home, I didn't reach out to Paula. I celebrated New Year's, focused on work, and enjoyed time with friends. I didn't miss her. But a couple of months later, she started texting me. Her messages were warm, really warm. Now that I'm writing this, it's starting to hit me. Maybe she just ended her relationship and needed a rebound. I was the convenient option. I mean, there I was, all polished up, version 2.0. We had some flirty, heated chats. She told me she had butterflies in her stomach because of me, that she knew I loved her, and even asked me to admit it. Being the sap I was, I sent her a gift, the latest iPhone, and a handwritten letter pouring out my feelings. She was thrilled, and I decided to request a transfer to her city. We started another long-distance relationship. That summer, I visited her again. I brought gifts, met her father, and celebrated her birthday. I went all out, spent money on nice meals and fun outings. We had a great time together. When she got sick, I doted on her like she was a child. Flowers, cash for personal expenses. I was attentive in every way I could be. By fall, my transfer was approved. Paula found an apartment near her parents' house the day I arrived, and I covered all the expenses. The new job was exciting but demanding. I worked late nights, and my salary was cut in half. But I didn't care. I was finally with the woman I loved in a fantastic city. Living together, though, was tough. Paula had a sharp tongue and plenty of complaints. We clashed often, but I still cherished her. To her credit, she could be caring too. She always made delicious meals, picked out stylish clothes for me, and planned fun activities. Her parents and I got along great. I later found out her stepfather told her after my first December visit, "You should look at him, he's a great guy." We lived like that for about a year and a half before I proposed. Paula was ecstatic. She asked me, "Are you sure this is forever?" Of course, I said yes. A few months later, we started talking about having kids. By then, I'd saved enough to put a down payment on a small one-bedroom in a new building. Construction had just started, and we figured it'd be ready soon. We were renting at the time, but I ran the numbers and felt confident we could handle the costs, especially with a baby on the way. Then Paula had a miscarriage. It was heartbreaking, but we didn't give up. I supported her as best I could, and soon enough, we found out she was pregnant again. We were thrilled, but the joy didn't last long. Not long after, I learned my department was shutting down, and the developer behind our new apartment went bankrupt. There I was, 25 years old, with a baby on the way, living in a rental, all my savings tied up in a stalled construction project, and no job. I quickly decided the best move was to return to my hometown, where I'd have a better chance at landing a solid job. I spoke with Paula's parents, and we agreed she would stay with them while I sorted things out. A word about her parents: they loved their comforts. They liked fine dining, nice clothes, and vacations. They weren't particularly enthusiastic about grandchildren, though. Babysitting or giving us time alone wasn't really their thing. That said, they were generous with gifts and always provided good food. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling there wasn't much heart behind it all. I spent 3 years back in my home country, doing whatever it took to keep things afloat. I took any job I could find, slept on boxes in the back room of a shop, hustled, and saved every penny I could while waiting to get rehired into the service. Through it all, I sent Paula money faithfully and saved up as much as I could. When our daughter was born, I flew back for her birth, covering the best doctor, a private ward, and the surgery. It was a lot of money for someone technically unemployed, but I made it work. Soon after, I finally got back into the service. Unfortunately, the position didn't pan out, so I transferred to another one nearby. Meanwhile, Paula and our daughter continued living with her parents while I bunked with friends or acquaintances and kept saving. We talked daily, and Paula was understanding about my long absence. She knew I was working hard for our future and that I was inching closer to a stable pension. Her parents, however, were less patient. They were understandably annoyed by the chaos a baby brought, crying, fussing, the works. Still, I visited whenever I could during vacations. On one trip, Paula and I were looking through old photos on her laptop. I opened a folder labeled England and saw a picture of a guy I recognized from her social media around the time I was planning to move in with her the first time. In the photo, he was cozying up to her. When I asked who he was, she said they'd met during that trip. That's when everything clicked. I realized why she'd pulled away from me back then. I asked her, "Do you remember that this was right when we were dating?" Her face said it all, wide eyes, panic, scrambling for words. She stammered something about him being a friend of Paula's and how she wasn't like that anymore. Of course, she swore nothing had happened between them. For a moment, I thought about snapping, packing up, and filing for divorce first thing in the morning. But then I looked at our sleeping daughter and at Paula. I didn't have the guts. Instead, I played the role of the man in charge, saying something like, "If this ever happens again, you can imagine the rest." She did her best to smooth things over after that, and I let it slide, though the whole situation gnawed at me. The tension didn't stop with her parents either. At one point, I offered to move them and Paula with the baby to live with me for a couple of years until I could stabilize things. They could save money, and I could be there for them. But Paula didn't want to leave her comfortable life for what she called the middle of nowhere, even if it was temporary. Her stepfather eventually hit his limit. He told me either I needed to take Paula and the baby, or he'd buy their tickets himself. He even started lecturing me about how to live my life. I snapped back, saying I'd already found a new job and would come to get them soon. After that, he told me he regretted ever recommending Paula to me. We didn't speak for a long time after that. Finally, I was able to bring Paula and our daughter back. We rented a place and lived like that for about a year and a half. By then, my new job's salary wasn't great, prices had gone up, and we were tightening our belts. I was the only one working since Paula was still on maternity leave. Despite everything, I managed to get our apartment completed. But it was too small for the three of us, so I decided to sell it and take out a mortgage on something bigger. We planned to register the new apartment under her stepfather's name. At the time, we'd patched things up, and this arrangement made sense to secure future housing benefits from the state. Meanwhile, I started exploring options for post-service work since retirement was getting closer. I was optimistic. Soon, we'd be in a much better place financially and finally have the life I'd been working toward. But money was always a sore spot. Paula had a habit of spending on things we didn't need, and it drove me crazy. One fight was about her wanting to buy her mom a $7,000 gift for Women's Day. I couldn't understand why we'd spend that much when it would leave us in the red. I argued, "If you spent $2,000, would she love you any less?" These arguments became more frequent, and the stress wore me down. I was exhausted from work and started neglecting myself, lost weight, stopped working out, and fell into a routine of just work and home. But I had a clear goal and kept telling myself it was temporary. Just 6 more months, and things would finally start falling into place. After my ex came off maternity leave, she got a job as a secretary for the general manager of a factory. He was rarely around since he mostly lived in Asia. Not long after, she got pregnant again. It happened during ovulation. I didn't pull out in time. When she told me, I froze. I didn't act like a man. I acted like an idiot. I couldn't wrap my head around how we'd afford another kid. She was still in her probationary period at work, so this meant she'd have to quit. I didn't suggest an abortion, but I also didn't show any excitement about the pregnancy. Her parents weren't thrilled either. She took it hard. Eventually, I snapped out of it and tried to support her, but the damage was done. She had a miscarriage not long after. She returned to work a little later, and 6 months after that, the real turning point came. I was about to sell our apartment, but something was eating at me the night before the deal. I couldn't sleep. I glanced at her lying beside me and noticed how much things had changed. We'd started sleeping under separate blankets. She'd grown cold, didn't want to touch me, and barely checked in during the day. She'd also started working out, saying she wanted to lose weight. Then there was her phone. She changed her avatar to a picture of herself from the time she came back from England, right after she dumped me for the first time. It was like a slap in the face. That night, I couldn't help myself. I checked her phone. And there it was, intimate texts with another guy. He asked her if she liked sleeping in lingerie or pajamas, and she eagerly replied. My chest felt like it was ripping apart. I woke her up, dragged her to the kitchen, and sat her down. I asked her, "Do you want to start, or should I?" She didn't even hesitate. "Since you already know, you might as well start." What floored me was her complete lack of remorse. She admitted to everything, said she was talking to someone, liked him, and had fallen out of love with me. She shrugged and said, "It happens." I told her I couldn't forgive her and started packing my things. She didn't even try to stop me, just asked where I was going. I said, "That's none of your business." I left and stayed with a friend. Less than 24 hours later, I caved and went back to talk. I begged her, "Why did you do this? We're a family. We should fight for each other." But her answer crushed me. "I don't want to fight for anything. We're better off apart. I don't need anyone." She told me she never loved me, that I'd essentially bought her with gifts, and that my problems had suffocated her. I was reeling. Then I found out about the guy she was seeing, Vajia, the driver for her boss. He was 41, lived with his ex-wife and her son from another marriage, and had no money. He was the opposite of successful. My ex had even come home once, gushing about how fast Vajia's boss's Maybach was. I tracked down Vajia's ex-wife online and messaged her, pretending to be interested in her. She played along and invited me to meet her at a club with her friends. When I got there, I laid on the charm, bought drinks, and danced the night away. At one point I asked her to drop the act and just tell me about Vashia. She said, "He's got a way of sweet-talking women, but don't worry, he's broke. They'll run away from each other soon enough." I took a picture with her, like the idiot I am, and sent it to my ex. Later that night, Vajia's ex sent me a voice message, telling me Vajia wasn't home with her. I knew exactly where he was. I wanted to go back to confront them, but my cab driver, a middle-aged Turkish man, overheard my conversation. Adjusting his rearview mirror to look me in the eye, he said in a calm but firm voice, "I know what you're thinking. You want me to take you back there. But that's not your home anymore. It's just a fallen woman who doesn't belong to you. Don't go back. You deserve better." That night, I was already drunk and spiraling. Vajia, my ex's lover, had given me a cigarette earlier, and though I didn't smoke, I lit it anyway. I muttered to myself, "Screw it. Tonight, I'm letting go of everything holding me back." Days of bottled-up anger, pain, and exhaustion had pushed me to my limit. Fueled by anger and booze, I ended up outside my ex's apartment. I couldn't even remember the intercom code or the apartment number. Then, as if on cue, the door opened, and Vashia stepped out. Without thinking, I grabbed him by the throat and dragged him inside. My head was spinning, but one thought stayed clear: don't punch him, or your career's over. So instead I grappled with him, overpowering him and choking him. When I finally released him, I growled, "Let's go outside." We stepped out, and just then, my ex appeared, running between us. She screamed at me, "What are you doing here? I called him. We're done. Why attack him? You're nothing. The best thing you can do is leave." I looked at her, then at him, and something inside me just snapped. I turned and walked away. But I couldn't let it end like that. I turned back to Vajia, who tried to play innocent, saying, "We were just talking. Nothing happened, and you attacked me." I sighed. "Fine. Sorry. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want things to escalate further, so I let it go." I went back inside with my ex. It was quiet, too quiet. She calmly told me, once again, that she'd made up her mind and we were over. I left for good that night. The next morning, I wrote her an email. It was the most pitiful, soul-bearing thing I've ever written. I know. A million times I know what I did. A stamp in your passport isn't a burden. You have every right to be happy and desired. I accept everything as it is, no hope for pardon. I'm not asking for love, forgiveness, or even understanding. Just the chance to go far away. Forgive my stupidity and stubbornness. But even if I face an Arctic Ocean filled with icebergs of your cold feelings, I'll fight. Not by breaking your peace, but gently, from a distance. I've made 1,000 mistakes and no right moves. Still, I'll fight for this family because you're my family, even if I'm not yours. I'm sorry, but I won't give up. Even now, I cringe at the memory of writing that. I had robbed myself of every shred of dignity. I've since apologized to myself for being so weak, but it took time to realize how far I'd fallen. For some reason, I continued to talk to Vajia's ex-wife. She recorded our conversations, though I never said anything incriminating. She even tried to provoke me, saying, "Why not use your connections to ruin him? Don't you want your family back?" But the last shred of reason I had screamed, "Enough of this mess." I ended that chapter quickly. Then I made another stupid move. I tried meeting my ex's friend Paula, the one who knew everything. This woman was a walking red flag, divorced, cheated on her husband, and now involved with anyone from deputies to sailors. I'd always told my ex that Paula's lifestyle was toxic, but my ex seemed to admire her. When I couldn't find Paula at work, my ex found out about my attempt and called me. She spat. "You're the lowest of the low. I'll tell her to spit in your face if she sees you." Even her parents stopped speaking to me after I shared her texts with Vajia. Her stepfather, who once supported our marriage, eventually backed her decision. She stood firm. "I'd rather be alone than stay in a rotten family." Looking back, the whole situation was humiliating and absurd. A self-respecting man wouldn't have sunk to those depths, and an adequate woman wouldn't have orchestrated this mess. Finally, I told myself, enough. I stopped watching her, stopped texting her, stopped calling. Communication became strictly about our child, limited to a message or two every few days. My brain sought answers in peace, so I turned to forums and YouTube. That's where I eventually found guidance and support. Things couldn't have gotten worse, yet I held on. What gutted me most was realizing that while I had moved out, Vajia had moved in. My ex tried replacing me with him, even as a father. When I came to pick up my daughter, I'd knock on the door and hear them laughing or deep in conversation. It tore me apart. That's supposed to be my place. Why the hell are they in that apartment? I couldn't stop wondering, how could she not feel disgusted doing this with him on our couch? The hardest part was leaving my daughter behind. She'd cling to me, crying, "Daddy, don't go." Every time, my heart shattered. I couldn't understand how my ex could be so indifferent. I didn't understand women then. Honestly, I still don't, even though I've learned more. I'm just starting to figure out who they really are. To save myself, I quit drinking, sold my apartment to pay off debts, updated my wardrobe, and got a car. A month later, I started dating again, using Tinder, Badoo, and even trying to meet people on the street. At first, it felt hollow, like scorched earth inside me. But I knew I needed to feel that I could like someone else, even if just to move forward. I didn't rush into anything, no sleepless nights with anyone, just casual conversations. Slowly, I normalized my sleep, regained the weight I'd lost, and adjusted to my new reality. There was no thought of reconciliation with my ex, just the desperate need to climb out of the pit I was in and never fall back in. Then, one evening, I got a text from her. "Come walk with the little one." Something felt off, but I agreed. When I arrived, my daughter ran into my arms. My ex followed, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I asked calmly, "Is everything okay?" She nodded and asked if she could join us for a walk. I was skeptical but agreed. We wandered from one park to another, almost like old times. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "Are you staying with us tonight?" Caught off guard, I said I didn't have anything to change into. She replied, "Just bring what you need." I stayed. That night, after putting our daughter to bed, we sat together. I hugged her, and she fell asleep in my arms. But my thoughts were a storm. How can you not feel disgusted lying here? You're like a dog, throwing me a bone, and I'm wagging my tail. I got up and decided to leave. But I didn't. 5 times I got up and sat back down, pacing like some bad actor in a cheap play. I didn't really want to go, but I knew things would never be the same. I ended up living there for 2 weeks. We went to the seaside, visited restaurants, and had family outings. My daughter was overjoyed, and during the day, things seemed fine between my ex and me. But at night, intimacy felt forced, like she was going through the motions. I'd check her phone while she slept and found out the truth. Vajia had dumped her, and she was heartbroken. She told her friends, "I feel so bad. The main thing is not to text Liam." She was still hung up on him. I didn't need the phone to know that. I could feel it in her every interaction. She withdrew the divorce petition, though I'd been the one who suggested it and handled the paperwork. But there was no remorse on her part. She claimed she wasn't a bad person, and said, "Breakups are always both people's fault." When I asked if Vajia ever tried to contact her again, she assured me, "It's over. If he does, I'll tell him I'm married." But her words didn't convince me. She was still emotionally tied to him, and I knew it. For her birthday, I bought her an iPhone and gave her money to celebrate with her friends. Yes, I know, I'm a fool. She thanked me but later admitted, "I'm not attracted to you. Vajia had this masculinity I can't explain. It made up for his flaws. You don't have that." Her parents, who once opposed our divorce, now didn't support our reunion either. It felt like everyone blamed me for everything. I knew the whole situation was garbage. I should have cut her out of my life completely. But the weak part of me lingered. We stopped being a couple in reality, but officially, we were still married. Occasionally, I'd stay overnight. We'd lie in each other's arms, sometimes kissing, sometimes not, but there was no real intimacy. She'd borrow my car for work, and I'd hope that with Vajia out of the picture, she might cool down and things could normalize. And just like that, I was back to square one, filling my head with the same bullshit. One morning, after spending the night in her arms, she took my car without a word. The whole day went by, and then, in the evening, she sent me a message. "We went for a walk. Don't wait for us. Go stay with your friend." I knew immediately. I checked her Instagram, and sure enough, she'd added Vajia back. I called her, no answer. I called 15 times, yes, I know, pathetic, and finally she picked up. She spun some story about going to the sea with a friend and the kids. I didn't buy it. I sat at my friend's place, replaying the stupidity of it all in my head. The humiliation, the cycle, the absurdity of it. Late at night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and drove to her house. When I unlocked the door, Vajia's dog came running out. My daughter was washing up, and my ex was standing there, her eyes wide with shock. That's when I lost it. Everything I'd bottled up for months came spilling out. I yelled at her. "Why? Why are you such a bitch?" She looked at me calmly and said, "We're not together." I noticed her phone, an expensive one I'd bought for her, sitting on the table. I grabbed it, along with the box, receipts, and some of my belongings she still had. Then I walked out. As I stepped outside, there he was, Vajia, casually strolling up to the building with a bag of bottles. I couldn't hold back. "Hey, buddy," I said. "Let's go again tonight." I shoved him in the chest. He smirked. "Don't be so handsy. Who even are you?" "She's the one who decided." And he was right. As much as I hated to admit it, he was right. I clenched my fists, every fiber of me wanting to swing at his smug face. But then I caught sight of her watching us from the window. I didn't need another scene. No more duels or pointless words. I just muttered, "Adios," and walked away. As I got to my car, my ex came running after me. She demanded the phone, saying she'd transfer the data and give it back tomorrow. I told her to stay away from me, but she wouldn't let it go. She tried to grab the phone from me, and when I pushed her back, she started attacking me. I kept trying to get into my car, but she was relentless. I had to throw her off me several times, even pinning her to the hood to stop her from lunging. Finally, I got in, slammed the door, and drove off. When I got home and unlocked her phone, I couldn't believe what I saw. 7 years together, and this is who she really was. This time, I read a lot more because she had restored her conversations with her friends. Right after we broke up, her friends were asking her about me, about why we split up. Some of their messages were harsh. I don't feel sorry for him. I don't care about his life, as long as he keeps seeing our little girl. I decided to focus more on myself than anyone else. I'm with the kid right now, and I'm in a car with a guy. I don't care anymore. Men are disgusting after a divorce, especially ones like ours faced with tears of joy. He's hurt, but I couldn't care less. I've got a new guy now. Because I don't need to send my wife to work. I've been living like hell since I was 25. House child. They criticized me for not saving money. Anyway, what I wanted I got. Fate gave me a man where I'm the girl. He's got strong masculinity, though he's 11 years older. But that doesn't matter, I even like it. We're having fun. We're just enjoying each other's time right now. It wasn't like that with my husband in the beginning, so this is something new and exciting. I'm tired of him, always complaining, nagging, everything's bad because of money. I forgot what it's like to feel like a woman. I'm just not attracted to him anymore. To spend my life with a good man or a good father without being happy, what a waste of time I spent with such a brat. These messages were sent before Vashya dumped her, and then she tried to make a comeback. So, after all of that, she came to me. Like a pill, like a fool, knowing I would take her back. Then, after the comeback, there were messages with Vashya. I won't post them, but I'll say this, she was like a kitten stuck on him, and I never realized how affectionate she could be. I also discovered she was following her ex on Instagram, the one she cheated on me with when I came back from the army. And a year ago, there was some questionable messaging with a guy she called Super, clearly arranging a meeting. I didn't even know who my wife really was. From these conversations I also learned she wanted to have a baby with Vashya, and she told her friend she had woken up in love. She told me that a man could fall in love with a woman's child from her previous marriage. She tried to get the phone back a couple of days later, threatening to file a report claiming I had beaten her. I pushed her away, but I did it as gently as I could. Provocations. Now she's living with Vashya again, just like before the comeback. There's a lot more I could detail, but I tried to stay objective, no labels of resentment on her or her family. Just telling it like it is, as if I were an outsider observing. It's been about 1.5 months since the last incident with the phone. Every day, I watch your videos like a mantra, read useful books, and continue improving myself physically and mentally. No matter what happens, I'll never go back to her. If someone turns their back on you and doesn't want to be with you, I don't want to be with them either. I remind myself of that every day. Of course, I'm still grieving the future I imagined with her, a future that will never exist. But I try not to dramatize it, not to play the victim, and I don't talk about it with friends or acquaintances. My focus now is on taking my life seriously, and never allowing something like this to happen again. Wishing everyone a good day.